This is Cohesion, Concepts and Contexts, where we unpack and explore everything from architecture to the human experience around design. I'm Matthew Goldstein. In today's episode, we're talking about responsive design and overcoming roadblocks that arise within the creative process, whether it be responding to the natural topography of a site, to the client's brief, or overcoming budgetary constraints.
As always, thank you, Matt. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning back into the podcast.
Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back.
I feel like our episode is going to be particularly interesting because we're focusing on a conversation that will actually, I think, be relatable and applicable to any field that deals with a collaborative process. While it may appear effortless and seamless from the outside perspective, a peek behind the curtain can often reveal that many steps, obstacles will inevitably occur over the course of a project's timeline. Malik, let's dive into the reality of responsive design. You've had quite a few designs that you've had to respond to and some mid-course corrections along the way. How about you expound on this subject today?
I think one of the mantras that I always go to is to respond and not react to different scenarios that come up or different obstacles and whatever that may be, whether it's site responsive or client responsive, or, you know, there's negotiations that you have to make. I think it's really important to work and negotiate with the process and with the people around it and figure out how to navigate those challenges and hurdles to come up with, you know, solutions as they occur throughout the process. And I think that to me is more about responding, taking the time, taking 2 steps back, 1 step forward, and sorting out like what the bigger picture is, and then making an informed decision. That way you're responding and not reacting.
I think that's astute of you. From a human design perspective, I find fundamentally with the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, it's extremely frustrating for people in fulfilling their design, and with time consumption. It doesn't happen overnight, these projects. The key to knowing when to speak, when to listen, when to respond, I think these are all a natural part of your tenure as a designer. What is the points you want to bring up when it comes to the actual process of working with others? What's a couple of things you want to focus on?
I think it's really important to expect the unexpected, navigating issues or solutions with clients, budgets, different environments, different terrains you're working with, different personalities. There's all of these variables that come to play. Yeah. You know what I mean? There's like a lot of that you have to navigate. And I think that's where it's really important to be able to stay ahead of the curve and understand the process as a whole, be confident in your skill set and what you're putting out, especially as something as so subjective or conceptual as architectural work sometimes. And you're having all of these general contractors and different vendors and trades dissecting your work and not necessarily questioning it, but assisting in realizing it. And things do come up. So I always say to not fall too much in love with your work yet, but fall in love with the process and expecting that unexpected, because that's where really the beauty of the outcome starts to come to life.
Yeah, I think the outcome versus the vision, and you mentioned it in a previous podcast, that you can't attach yourself to the outcome and be stubborn. I think you've done a pretty interesting job of responding and predicting situations that can occur. And obviously it's easier said than done. But we're talking about how to respond in a smart way to these objections, to these issues, these obstacles that can occur. Can you think back in the early days when you were confronted with complicated challenges while you experienced right out of the gate. So you're hungry, you've got a strong vision, you're creative. Tell us about some of the things you had in your earlier projects.
Yeah, and I just want to also pinpoint that it's part of the whole design process is planning. So you're planning everything out. And so it's not like we're floating around and just kind of responding to things or reacting to stuff. This is very specific, dialed in things that is taking months to develop, but things do come up, you know what I mean? So you have to be able to navigate them. And so I think we're talking about negotiating with the nuances and being strategic with how you're sequencing a project and responding to a site. So for example, like if you have a lot in West Hollywood that's surrounded by other residences and the proximity is not expansive views, everything is internalized. One of the things that we did was we did the landscape first. And so we did the exterior landscape, edge condition, all of the bamboo, and building out that whole infrastructure from the landscape front at the beginning of the project, and protected it throughout construction so we could allow it to grow over that next 18 to 24 months to have some serious growth by the time the client moved in for privacy. Otherwise, it would be a little bit backwards if we were doing that towards the tail end. And so there was like this fine line between figuring out how to sequence a project forward and respond to a site, and thinking about strategy ahead of time to be able to work through those hurdles.
Yeah, I think it's interesting thinking back on my experiencing you putting bamboo in, because you're like, well, I'm putting in a root barrier so that it's installed. There's going to be no future issues. I'm going to grow the bamboo, then I'm going to strip it to 9 feet and polish it, and then there's going to be another 10 feet of bamboo above it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You haven't even put a foundation.
I know, but it was so important to be able to. There was so much, holding on that back view and figuring out how to. We weren't in Malibu. There wasn't an ocean view. We weren't looking out onto a national forest. We were looking at an apartment building, and so it was very exciting. But the client wanted to have a serene space that was in a metropolis and that was very central located. And so one of the ways that we could do that was really just work with the parameter condition and internalize everything. So it made the architecture that much more important, and those moments and vignettes throughout the house, and integrating nature within all of that. And so that all played a factor.
I think it was remarkable to look through your flow throughs and go, how are we in Bali all of a sudden? How are we in these intimate spaces and it's completely exotic and tropical? Now, you constantly discussing, projects and intricacies with me over the years, and I find it completely fascinating. With these challenges, the nuances, the complications that can be associated with projects, and the features, that a lot of these integrations of various elements, like your designs are comprised of incredible elements, as we'll discuss in future episodes. As you moved forward, you took your challenges even further by challenging yourself to design projects without even basic amenities. So you go from all these incredible water installations and waterfalls to no utilities and no basic amenities in which to build on. Can you expand on that? That was a really radical expansion of your talent base.
I think it was important to go back to my roots and, work through my thesis work and realize it in a physical, real life application and see what that outcome may be. Spent a whole year putting it together. And so it was really important to be able to find a site that could fit that exact theme of what I was looking for and those characteristics. And that included budgetary concerns immensely, because a lot of it was out of pocket, access to the site, and things that we could work through on an existing footprint. Because the beauty about it was taking what was already there and injecting life into it and working through that and applying this idea of an icebreaker educational experience about what the concept of off-grid living is. Everybody's on board or is more familiar with it now, but 7 years ago, that was not necessarily a thing people understood that much. And so it was really important to be able to explore what the options were, and being out in the desert and understanding that solar energy was so important, and you could produce so much of it out with clear sun and skies, and being able to take advantage of that and taking advantage of the environment in a way that is not necessarily harmful to the environment, but you're expanding on it.
I think it's so enjoyable when you as a designer go out to a place with incredible vistas and views and no perceived amenities at all. And what came out of a blank canvas was innovation and inspiration. Can we unpack this a little bit from genuinely a blank canvas? If people saw what you were working with at inception, can you expand on that in terms of your designing and honoring the space that you were creating?
Yeah, I think it was a blank canvas to an extent. It was a blank canvas with parameters, and those parameters were preset already, and since the Homestead Act that the federal government put together in 1953. And these outcomes were these, small homesteads that people would be able to build on 2.5 acres or 5 acres of land, and then the government would give that land over to them for free to be able to populate certain areas in the country. And one being outside of Palm Springs in what is now known as Joshua Tree. And taking that footprint and using that as that parameters as part of one of my points that I needed to focus on how to work with that, along with budget, along with there's no external utilities anywhere, being 2,700 feet above sea level, and understanding and innovating and integrating with the environment around me and being inspired by it, because we were designing, camping,
Yes.
and building all at the same time, and really becoming one with that whole process.
I think a sane person might go, okay, there is a cement slab, a couple of little bits of beams, no utilities. Why build there? You're a creative person. Why build there?
I think why not? Because this was before, before people were jumping at the idea of being next to national parks. And I really do believe that national parks in our country are like time capsules that everyone can enjoy from all walks of life.
Love that.
And it's just a place where, everyone can appreciate Mother Nature untouched, uncensored. And being in Joshua Tree and being alongside Joshua Tree National Park, this property was just like the perfect property, and it was so inexpensive, it was so cheap, and it made sense to be able to apply and do it there. It just kind of everything fit from looking at all these different properties all over, and it just made sense to be able to kind of explore that. There's zero light pollution, and it had this pre-Petra feel to it, which was so great and so exciting. And it was reminiscent of my childhood and growing up in the desert. And so it was a really awesome way for me to be able to commute from Los Angeles out east and get a taste of that and be able to work through that.
Create a little picture of you're driving from downtown LA from your high rise. Can you paint a little picture for us of like what happened when you would drive to your site?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that time would be with just getting out to the desert, and you're driving on. Sometimes you're stuck in traffic, and then you're getting through all of that, city noise, and then all of a sudden you're driving down a half mile of dirt road, and you're an unincorporated, non-maintained
Yeah.
land, and you're all of a sudden off-roading and gaining access to something that you need to work on. So, and it's not even just the car part and the commute, it was more about the heavy duty trucks and all of the material that needed to arrive. That was a more complicated part than just like a regular vehicle, and the complexities that came with that was not fun. So
oh, how about a fun one? When we had removed some of the homestead debris that had accumulated at 2 a.m, something particular happened involving a dumpster.
oh my god, yeah. I mean, things do come up, and it's a lot to be able to, you are out in the wild, so expect the unexpected in that regard, and you have to again negotiate with those things, whether it's a logistic or things that are going on. But you kind of just have to sort through that and work through it, and call the right people for help when you need it.
Yeah. And then they get stuck on the sand for 2 hours at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we jimmied our way out and never looked back.
Yeah, for sure.
Again, some of the nuances, and I think a lot of creatives can take things for granted. But for me, part of the magic for me was seeing the process of your gray water system that I had never been exposed to before, except for I saw the results on all of your acreage. Can you expound on this a little bit with just the gray water for?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a really simple system. It's essentially all the water that you're using is going to a gray water and black water. And it's something that can be done in an inexpensive way to be able to repurpose and reuse the water that you're utilizing, especially because we were out in Mother Nature. We had to be on septic system. We had leach fields, and we were deciphering black water, which is essentially toilet water, and then everything else like sink water or shower water. And that gets filtered out, deciphered, and distributed out to the surrounding landscape that's around the structure. And so it was a great way to be able to reuse the water that was already being used to, water and bring back certain species that were local to the area, because you are in a dry environment, and it didn't make sense to set up, irrigation systems, first of all, because we didn't even have the funds for it, and it didn't make sense to be able to waste that much water in a state like California. So this was a happy middle ground to be able to reuse what we were already utilizing while allowing it to grow the surrounding landscape and bring back wild animals and other.
Well, I think the kind of rewilding of just seeing your acreage turn green, and the process of the Joshua Tree tortoise showing up and wandering by, and seeing a lynx out in the horizon of the property, it was extremely tangible from something almost imperceptible in terms of the gray water system. Speaking of restoring the ecosystem, you created a very immersive experience. Tell us about the process that's occurred from you starting the process of restoring the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think before, it's not like I set out to a project and I'm like, I'm going to restore and adjust this whole wildlife. That's not necessarily
It was a side effect.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely because I'm not an expert in that. It's just making informed decisions based on the environment that you're in, and being as mindful as possible, because I do believe that, yes, it's a property that you've purchased out in the wilderness or near a park, whatever, but remember, there are migration patterns. We're in their territory. We're not in an urban environment, and so you have to be really mindful and quote unquote read the room. You know what I mean?
I love that. Read the room. I love that.
So it's responding to those things and being really, really mindful of making those informed decisions. So when I'm looking at a project or simply walking through, I'm immediately looking at solar orientation, various views, light, how you're moving through the space, and what existing infrastructure may be there, what may not be there, how to complement what's already there, how to optimize what's already there, if there's anything there, and really work with what's existing, whether it's already pre-existing trees that are placed and navigating around them, integrating them within the design, being mindful of them not getting damaged during construction, and then really kind of working within and around all of that, because at the end of the day, that is a someone's home or someone's, whether that may be a small rabbit or whatever, and so it's just kind of realizing that that's part of the process, and negotiating with that, I think, is really exciting, and it's really fun to be able to work through those things. And that's when I feel like you're really integrating instead of imposing yourself on an environment, because you're being so mindful of the whole process.
I love that. Obviously, every project, every environment, you have projects going up the Pacific Crest. There's you're showing up all over the place in these very, very different environments. And of course, every project's going to have curveballs, or a series of curveballs. How do you position yourself strategically to handle these kind of situations, because of environments are so dramatically different? Of course, you've mentioned planning, but what are some additional things that you do to respond to your environments?
Definitely research. Research, especially when it's different typologies, different locations, whether we're working on a project in a desert or up in the mountains, or by the water, or there's so many different variables that come into play. If I'm working on a project in Cody, Wyoming, and we're dealing with migration patterns that I mentioned earlier, or we're up in a mountain project that we're working on there for a client, and it's in Idlewild, and there's a whole set of different rules there with snow loads and navigating forests and things like that, and then being in something like a barren desert landscape. I think it's really important to be able to do the research, understand the context in which you're in, and then being able to take a step back and look how you're going to integrate yourself. It's kind of like, jump rope. Before you do that, like, you have to, while two people are doing the hopscotch or whatever, you have to be able to jump in at the right time and figure out when it makes sense, and looking at the bigger picture first, and then backtrack from there, so you can plan accordingly with whatever obstacles that may be predicted, and prep for that contingency of things that may come up.
To expound on research, when Malik says research, I remember with the Wyoming project, you knew how many thousands of deer went through, how many hundreds of bears, and the 23 pairs of eagles that all required the Bureau of Land Management collaboration. So when you did your research, you really did your research.
Well, we did our research on a high level, because obviously we're not sitting there figuring out deer, but we do reach out to consultants, and we're like, you have to reach out to the right biologist and the right people that can. It's actually a few-year process where they track the migration patterns, and they figure out what the seasons are, and you can't really do any disruptions from this month to this month, because this is when they're moving through the space, or there's lots of variables, and so you have to really be able to map that out from a logistics standpoint, from a construction front, but also working with nature as it's happening, because it's going to happen regardless whether you like it or not. And so working with it is the best and the most optimal way possible.
You mentioned in previous podcasts that you've had to trust your gut. When you've experienced different obstacles, like a financial obstacle, some people might bear down, or they might respond, or they might patiently wait. Can you respond to some pragmatic things like that in terms of an unexpected cost for something you weren't expecting?
I think part of the learning process to it is trusting your gut on mid-course corrections, because those aren't necessarily mistakes. You're being informed and you're learning from it. and you're trying to sort out and make the best decisions forward.
Mm.
Whether you're building a project in the city or out where you're trying to source water, and a water well comes out dry, and you're trying to sort out what does that look like to get a precious resource like that, and the curveball and the cost with it, and what did you pour yourself into already financially, and how to navigate that, how to look at the different resources that you have, not necessarily from a physical standpoint, but what other options are at play for you, and who can you reach out to in your local community or your jurisdiction in regards to like, okay, these are my other options that I can do here, and I can do step 1 before I get to step 2, and then step 3, and then work your way that way.
Yeah, it's interesting to me as an expert in human design is I tell clients that wisdom is the ability to turn a mistake into a mid-course correction, and that builds your strategy. It also builds your dialogue, your systems, your approach to clients. Something Oscar Wilde said is anyone who lives within their means suffers from a lack of imagination. And I think with creators who create for creators, I think that's something we can definitely find to be the case. You've also, because you create for creators in the private sector, in your experiences with creating experiences for the public, can you elaborate on an example of a creative person that had something so conceptual and new that wasn't part of the planning, that created a bit of a tsunami effect on the planning, the supply chain? How do you temper that? How do you negotiate that with creating for creators?
I think for that, it's if you're ready and you're always working with the process, and it's something that you really enjoy and love and working at a constant daily basis, you don't have to get ready. So then you're able to have options. You'll be able to use your emotional intelligence, your gut, and you'll probably have some backup options too, because in design and architecture, there's always a plethora of different things that you want to explore and experience. It's going to always come down to budgetary concerns and other aspects of the project that may not work for that. But then I think it's always good to have options and plan. I always plan for 3 scenarios that are either in different phases or conceptual. Some are more design developed. And being able to turn a disadvantage into an advantage. I think it's really important, especially when you're making decisions under budget pressures and there's not really that much room for error. So you have to really weigh out your pros and cons and make informed decisions that way.
It's interesting to me because one of your out-of-pocket projects that you were working on, you had to create a storage unit for battery cells and just amenities. And this storage unit was, going to cost you money. But something
we called that the off-grid lab, not a storage unit.
Off-grid what?
Off-grid. It was an off-grid lab in concept. It was idea of having
it was actually. Remember that now.
Yeah,
but
it was just a fun way to explore.
Something really fun happened by you doing something that was a lab, a pedestrian thing to store your solar panel batteries, and then you innovated on top of that storage unit. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely did start out as a storage unit, quote unquote, but really it was just a shell. And it was just a really simple, it started as a shed, a small, tiny shed, and then it turned into this bigger shell. And then all of these different utilities had to go into it and fit, and you need to be able to maintain them. They needed different access points. These are machines and pieces of equipment that needed to function and work together because you were your own utility company. And so you needed to be able to navigate those things. And then it slowly turned into a bigger shell. And then from there, I was like, wanting to see how this small shed was responding to the rest of the design and not feeling like an afterthought. And so it was really important for me to maintain what it was, but then be able to explore this idea of what's occurring above it. And again, going back to my childhood and things that I did in growing up, like stargazing at night on my grandparents' rooftop in the Middle East, that triggered that experience for me. So being able to explore that was really important, and placing an outdoor bedroom and be able to stargaze at night was like the perfect thing to do right on top of all of that equipment that was energizing the space in the cabin.
And something you probably won't toot your horn on is that simple bedroom, that stargazing suite, actually ended up getting featured in Architectural Digest and was listed as the top 50 stargazing suites in the world, coming from something as dealing with a roadblock of how do I store it and things, to be one of the most scrutinized stargazing suites with Architectural Digest.
It was just such a fun way because people they were bouldering all day at the park. We could literally see from the cabin.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, they can boulder their way upstairs, and then they could hang out and be able to look outside. They felt secure because you were on the second level.
Yeah.
You were essentially on a roof deck, an enclosed roof deck and it's facing the North Star, which is the one that was the most constant. And so there's just like this whole beauty and alignment of all of these things coming together. And being able to sit there and watch a nightly show, and the sky is ever changing and doing all of these different things in different moments of the night was really something to see. So it was really exciting. To do that.
I will definitely never forget the space station going by one night. Pretty remarkable. Another remarkable thing in terms of a challenge, an obstacle, a roadblock, and it's something we've kind of all varying degrees experienced, is you had to create a tangible response to a design that you were creating. And it was during the past 3 years where we all know that there was a slight pandemic, and you were having to design and optimize experience beyond the pandemic while working with people during the pandemic in order to do that. And also on a bigger picture level, from a design standpoint, something that you tapped into was being aware that, because you've been working off-grid since 2016 on some of your projects, is that you noticed a big migration of people during the pandemic, anxious for nature, for a cabin, and seeing a radical shift that occurred from there. So from a human design standpoint, the entire globe experienced different forms of upheaval, but you had to design and implement and modify during those 3 years. So tell us how that went for you.
Yeah, I think that was something really interesting to see that all come into play, because when I was working on the project at the beginning, everybody was like, well, where are you going? What are you doing out there? It's like in the boonies.
Nobody's out there.
But no one was appreciating how beautiful the nature was, or at least not many people were at the time. And then I think the pandemic really pushed people out of the urban environments to get a breath of fresh air, and be able to experience that. And it was refreshing to be able to see that what I was doing 3 years prior, even more so, because I was working through it during my thesis work in school. I just didn't have the means to be able to actually apply it in real life. It was really, really exciting to be able to respond to that to that, and to people being able to go out there and stay and experience that medium of architecture out in the middle of nature, being disconnected from everyone, both from a utility standpoint, but also from a personal life standpoint, and having that breath of fresh air, being able to sleep in an outdoor bedroom when everybody wanted to be outside.
Yeah.
All of those things just hit. It was like a hot knife through butter. It just like
yeah. And I think it was interesting that you planned and also modified your design based on cultural needs changing, with how you're providing for materials, how you're working with contractors during that time, but also how you stuck to your guns, planned, and responded to the shifts that occurred. I think it's been a delightful journey to see how you were kind of a little ahead of the pack in 2016, starting to help people kidnap themselves out of the city to experience being enveloped by nature with beautiful designs. Anything you want to tell our audience in terms of when you're facing an obstacle or a series of obstacles? You're naturally designed to paint a bigger picture. You're naturally a visionary. What's something that helps you sustain yourself when the going gets tough?
Working out, fitness. I think that's like the thing to be able to, get that through. It's, working through something else other than just building and designing and sitting at a computer for hours on end, and then negotiating on site and explaining yourself to people to be heard, even though you have all of these drawings and all of these details and specifications. It's nice to be able to get away from that. And, whether you're working out at a gym, for me, I work out at a indoor-outdoor gym. It's nice to be in nature, to be able to take out to do those HIIT interval, high intensity interval trainings, whether it's just outside, sometimes even outside visits.
Your morning workouts are cardio and almost meditative in terms of it helps you align before you jump into the office or go on a site visit.
Yeah, it's just really great for blood flow and being able to kind of jumpstart the day and get your mind. There's nothing like anxiously waking up and scrambling to answer an email. It's like a nightmare morning, to set the tone for your day. But if you're doing your cardio, it's a good way to jump. It's almost kind of like jump starting a car, getting it warmed up, and then you're off you go. And so I think for me, it's really important about that, and we can dive into that more.
From a human design standpoint, we're definitely going to dive into that more. But I'm sure if you see Malik on Instagram, you will understand that he does take his fitness seriously. But I actually think that's a really refreshing way to end today's podcast, because it's grounding yourself with self-care and then responding to your circumstances versus reacting. And all of the things we touched on today, we're going to dive in deeper in additional podcasts. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Malik, as always. Thank you, Matt,
guys,
for helping us through this. We'll talk to you soon.
Yes.